And Scott Morrison, the Liberal frontbencher. I want to have a look at another couple of stories around today here on the domestic political front. Fairfax is reporting today that union chiefs are accusing Kevin Rudd of breaking a promise that he apparently told them before the last election that he would abolish the Australian Building and Construction Commission. We know the government's planning to replace that commission in February next year. The details of the new body, though, are unknown. Scott Morrison, this sort of story makes those election ads we saw back in 2007 seem pretty silly, don't they? It seems pretty clear from this sort of story that the unions don't have much of a hold over Kevin Rudd at all.
Well, look, I think what's very concerning here is the fact that we had now a Prime Minister who was having secret meetings with unions, making all sorts of promises and pledges behind closed doors. And we're seeing this now come up in the issue of site allowances on a lot of the stimulus projects, where the unions are now putting the whole issue of site allowances back on the agenda. And so, you know, I'm very concerned about the government's view on the ABCC. This is a very important institution that was introduced to bring some law back into our construction sector. The construction sector is the engine of our economy, and to have union control and domination through that, through a lessened and a weakened ABCC, and that's what I think we will probably end up seeing under this government. They will talk tough on terms of union involvement in the industry, but you'll see a lot of closed-door arrangements, a lot of backdoor deals with the union movement to placate them. And there was $500,000 that was handed over, $500,000 by the ETU to the ALP at the last election with a consideration of a return, and they believe they have it coming. So, look, I think the devil will be in the detail on this, and the Prime Minister will get up and say, oh, well, no, we haven't done that. But when you look at the detail, I think you'll see some very handsome and sweet arrangements there for the union movement.
Jason, Clare, does it seem strange to you that Kevin Rudd would promise something like this just weeks before the ALP actually changed its policy before the election on this commission?
Well, what we promised to do before the last election was to get rid of work choices, and we couldn't have made it clearer when it comes to the Australian Building and Construction Commission. In the same policy that I waved around on the show a couple of weeks ago, Forward with Fairness, I said that that policy made it very, very clear that we would abolish the ABCC and replace it with a new specialist division within Fair Work Australia, and that would be set up in January of next year. That's what we said we would do before the election, and that's what we're going to do. Justice Wilcox has now handed down a report which sets out all the detail of all the transitional arrangements where we would close down the ABCC and set up a new specialist division that is set up within Fair Work Australia. That's what we promised to do before the last election. It couldn't have been clearer, and that's what we are going to do. It's a fair and it's a balanced approach. Might not make all the unions happy, might not make all the employer groups very happy, but the fact is we've got the balance right. This is the right thing to do, and it'll be set up in January of next year.
We are running out of time. Just finally though, Jason, Clare, there are reports today that new guidelines contained in the early learning framework would force childcare centres to fly Aboriginal flags at their childcare centres. Is that something that's part of Labor's policy? Is this something that is going to happen as reported?
No, it's not. There's nothing in that framework about flying the Aboriginal flag or the Australian flag or the pirate flag. It's nothing about that at all. It's about improving the quality of early childhood education. All the experts say that the earlier you can help young children open their minds, provide them with information, the better impact of their long-term education and employment outcomes. The young brains, 3, 4 and 5, are like sponges, and we need to do everything we can to give them an opportunity to learn. That's why we made a commitment at the election that we would provide universal preschool, universal access to preschool, and we're implementing that policy now, and we're making sure that the quality of early childhood education improves as well. It's all part of that. That's exactly what we're doing.
The rhetoric, though, Ashley, I don't think will match the reality. In New South Wales here, it's now actually more expensive to go to preschool than it is to go to childcare because of the way that the subsidies work. But look, I'm very worried, and I think people have a right to be sceptical about this. I mean, next thing you'll know, they'll be teaching Humpty Dumpty's gender neutral or something in our preschools and our childcare centres. So I think we have to be very mindful of this. Young minds are very receptive. I don't want to see our children institutionalised at a very young age, and I want to see them have the opportunity to grow and learn in accordance with how their parents want to see them grow and learn in their communities. And I think we have to be very careful of prescriptive guidelines coming with checks from the federal government telling kids and telling families what they need to be learning and what they need to be told, particularly about sensitive political issues. I think parents have to have the final say over these issues on every occasion, particularly in our childcare centres and our preschools.
Just actually very quickly before we go, just your take on one other story around today. I note that there's going to be a meeting held in Bali about a boat asylum seekers trying to strengthen regional efforts to combat people smuggling, human trafficking and transnational crime. This is an issue that, of course, has dominated debate between the opposition and the government. There are very stark policy differences here. But Jason, Clare, is there any concern within Labor that Labor's policies on this have in fact led to more people arriving on our shores? We've seen more boatloads of people arriving just in the last few days.
Well, I think in short the answer is no. We've got the balance right here. We want to work again constructively with the opposition on public policy here to make sure that people don't have incentives to thrust people onto our shores. And just like the opposition's position on broadband, or just like their position on schools, or just like their position on almost anything that becomes part of the daily news cycle at the moment, all the opposition wants to do is raise fear or object to things because they think it's in their political interest. You know, the most positive thing that Malcolm Turnbull ever said was that he wanted to offer bipartisanship support. And ever since then, he's opposed every single thing that the government has put up. And as a consequence, you've seen his support in the polls drop. If the opposition wants to do something constructive here or anywhere when it comes to public policy, they should be working with the government rather than just niggling, criticising, whinging, carping and opposing everything that we do.
The government doesn't like accountability, clearly. And what's clear on the issue you've raised is Labor's back and the votes are back. They have deliberately set out to liberalise policy in this area of border protection, and we're now starting to see that roll out in terms of on our shores. Now, we've warned about that. We said that would be an issue when they started to weaken these positions, and what we're seeing is the result of that policy writ large now. There's nothing wrong with an opposition that's going to hold the government to account, to ask them hard questions, to keep them accountable, to make sure they're doing things in Australia's interests, and the opposition will continue to do that. Someone has to put these guys under a lot of pressure in terms of the decisions they're making that are affecting our future, and this is just another area where the policy is being weakened, and we're seeing the results follow through as night follows day. Border protection remains a very important issue for our future, and the government needs to tighten up.
Actually, there's nothing wrong with accountability. There's nothing wrong with constructive debate. Unfortunately, we're not getting that. Every opportunity the opposition get, they just say no to everything. It's like that Little Britain episode, you know, computer says no, computer says no. Well, Australians say yes.
We'll all look forward to the outcomes of this Bali meeting. That'll be one to closely watch in the coming days. And of course, we'll have more updates on the protests in Thailand throughout the day, of course, as the situation there seems to deteriorate. Jason, Clare and Scott Morrison, thanks for your time.
Thanks Ashley.
And be sure to join David Spears this afternoon for PM Agenda at 4:15 Eastern. I'll be back with AM Agenda tomorrow morning. Until then, I'm Ashley Gillen. Thanks for your company.
Anyone expecting to win this gig will have to show